Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, prepare to be transported back 35 years in hobby history to 1984. June 1984. I'm going to take a look back at this old magazine, which I've had laying around. And this was the era. It was the pre-drone era. There were no drones as we know them back in 1984. There wasn't even electric model power. No, that's right, no electric. In fact, let's look through this magazine. Now, I think if you flew models back in the 80s, you'll know what to expect. But if you're new to the hobby, if you're young and all you've known is Chinese ARFs and 2.4 gigahertz digital radio gear and electric power, this will shock you. So let's have a look. Look, hot chick on the cover. They used to do that in those days, had hot chicks on the cover. And this is a magazine. Those of you who are young, this is a magazine. It's actually made from dead tree. It's paper. It's actually quite interesting. In theory, they will degrade over time, but I don't think you'll find many e-publications lasting as long as good old dead tree and ink. So let's have a look. Radio Controlled Models and Electronics, RCM&E as we used to call it. Very popular magazine from the UK out of the MAP stable. They did Aero Modeler, RCM&E, and a whole lot of hobby-oriented magazines, hobby engineering magazines. Really, lots of stuff came out of MAP, including lots of plans for models. This was $2.70 in New Zealand back in 1984. That's not a lot of money, is it? Right, let's have a look. And one thing you'll notice predominantly throughout here is engines, glow plug, nitro engines. They were the only real source of motive power we had for model aircraft back then. We didn't have electric. So here we go, ads for nitro motors, more ads for nitro motors. Now, also rotary wing was big. In the 80s, helicopters had just become practical. So every man and his dog was selling helicopters. And there were a lot of choice. A lot of it was made. We have Colt, which was I think a German company. They had a huge range of helicopters. There was a lot of small boutique helicopter manufacturers in the UK and around Europe. So yeah, you won't see much in the way of Chinese products in these pages because this was pre the Chinese hobby revolution. So Irvine, this was a UK engine manufacturer. They made a lot of different engines, and as you can see, they weren't cheap. Remember, this is 35 years ago, so £65 for a 60 size engine. You know, that's typically, what would that be these days, about 1,500 watts? No, maybe 1,200 watts. So a lot of power, quite a big motor. Here we go, and look, now we're starting to get onto the good stuff. Let me just pull out a little bit so you can see the top of the page. Radio gear back in the 1980s, it worked. We made do with what we had, but no LCDs, no programmable model memory, so every model had to be basically set up to appear the same to the transmitter. That means all your servos had to go the same way, all your linkages had to be adjusted with clevises rather than just trims and sub-trims. So this made it much more difficult to set up a model without all the fancy electronics we've got today. And a lot of these things didn't even have expo or dual rates. Some of them had dual rates. See, this has got a few switches. They're probably rate switches. But really, we're just getting into the computer era. The very first computer radios were starting to come along, but they were very primitive. And look at the big servos, big ass servos, and NiCad batteries. Woohoo, those were the days. Right, again, more helicopter Schluter. That was another German company that made a lot of helicopters. And there was quite a few of these little sort of unique boutique engines as well, because it wasn't just nitro that was big, it was the four-strokes had just come into being, and they were very popular because people wanted something different. So this is like a boutique four-stroke engine that Jack Williams never really took off. Was that the Webra? No, that's the Webra 40, that's right, Webra 40. I've never seen one of these. They did exist, but they were very rare, certainly in this part of the world. And of course, speaking four-strokes, Enya, a big name in model engines back in the day. And they had some four-strokes. Their four-strokes were really good, actually. In fact, Enya engines were really good. One of my first engines was an Enya 09. Enya 09 with a throttle for my single-channel radio days. It was brilliant. Then you'd have companies who would put almost their entire catalogue advertised in the magazine. That was quite handy. Again, entire catalogue almost in an ad. Super Tiger, that was back in the day before China took it over. That was an Italian company making engines. They were okay. They weren't my favourite engine, but they were okay. And here we go. Look, these ads, just total catalogues with prices. You don't see that today. Well, you don't see magazines today, do you, I suppose? And here we go. This is what I'm talking about, the the digital radio era. This is PCM, pulse code modulation. It was still long wire. It was still FM. Wasn't spread spectrum. Wasn't 2.4 gigs. It was still old. It was on. In the UK, it was probably on 35 or 36 megahertz. I forget what they used back then. But here we go. This is it. The future is fit up. Look, no LCD. You're lucky to get a little meter on here just to tell you how good your battery is. Everything else is little adjustable pots and switches under this plastic cover. It's like really, really primitive. But hey, we used it and it worked, and we were glad to have it. Over here, no Chinese ARFs. All the ARFs and the kits were made in the UK or in the USA. They were, you had to do a lot of building still. There weren't a lot of ARFs around. And again, helicopters. They were just so big. More ads. Lots of ads, isn't there? You see that? But ads don't seem to be as intrusive when they're in a magazine, do they? This is just some editorial stuff. Nothing really to look at there. Let me just turn the pages. New products. A big new motor from OS. Another 4-stroke. Solar film or solar fabric. Solitex, what was it? Yeah, this was a big thing. We had to cover our own models. We didn't buy them. They weren't ARFs and already covered. We had to build them and then cover them with a plastic film. Originally it was silk and tissue, of course, but now plastic films came in the 80s. More radio gear. JR, 9-bit pulse code modulation. So they had a 9-bit system, which is a resolution of 512 steps of your servo. Fantastic. I mean, I don't know many people would fly with the resolution that low these days, but we did. And again, 4-stroke. All 4 strokes. Everyone was into 4 strokes, and of course, multi-cylinder 4 strokes was starting to get a bit of a wiggle on. But again, you had some really weirdo, engines come along, overhead camshaft with whatever. See, this is quite an odd-looking thing. I've never seen one of those. HP, it's a German company, Austrian, I think, yes, Austrian. They made a range of engines, including conventional 2-strokes and this Aspen rotary valve 4-stroke. And have I ever seen one of those? By jingoes, I have. Look at that. I've got one. I've got one of these HP 49 VTs. In fact, this one with the black head is even better because it has a ball race Aspen valve. The original ones just had a bushing. It just required, they wore out and they weren't very good. These have got a ball bearing in the head to allow the Aspen rotary valve to spin without bouncing up and down. Brilliant. Fantastic. I'm going to put this in a model at some stage. But there you go. See, I'm so old, I've actually got the stuff that was in the magazines. And this is the bit this is what stimulated me to actually make this video. Look at this. Aerial. That's right. This is before the days of FPVs, before the days of digital cameras. All the old cameras, they had film in them. The old film, and you had to take it to the camera shop or to the chemist shop and then wait days while they get it processed and you get your little glossy pictures back on real card. Yeah, well, it doesn't happen now, does it? But yeah, so aerial photography 35 years ago. What to use and how to do it. Basically what you had to do, you had to build a great big lumbering aircraft and put one of these cameras in it, usually pointing down, and have a servo trigger the shutter. And if your camera didn't have auto film advance, then you had to land and advance the film manually and take off and fly again. Amazing, but hey, they did it. But certainly it was not first-person view. It was a very, very crude version of what we have today, because we think nothing these days of throwing a GoPro on a model or a small action cam on a model flying around, flying FPV with live video and pilot's view of what's going on. No, that was completely unheard of way back then. Didn't have the technology in 35 short years ago. So we had to use all these old-fashioned camera thingies, and I don't think you can actually get film developed these days, can you? I have no idea. But here's an example. See this one here? They've got the camera mounted inside the fuselage of a plane, pointing out the side, so that you can dip a wing and take a picture. Amazing. And more pictures there. And there's the camera poking out the side. You can see just down there. And this is obviously made a little enclosure for the camera. This way, the lengths you had to go to. Unbelievable. And rotary wingcraft, auto gyros. This is that model of the Benson, I think. I've never seen that particular model fly. I was always intrigued by it, but gyros, they're a bit dodgy at the best of times. So, and gliders were big. Gliders were very big. Slope soaring. I used to do a lot of slope soaring back in the 80s. There was a lot of interest in gliding. And not so much these days, although DLG has revived the sport, certainly for me. And so we've got many pages on gliding, soaring, thermal soaring, gliding. It really was a very popular aspect of the hobby. again, helicopters. As I said, helicopters were big, so we've got pages and pages about helicopters. Remember these? Remember that's a model shop. Remember those? You used to be able to walk in and buy stuff. Didn't have to go online. And look, someone hovering a helicopter, which is pretty much all we did back then. There was none of this 3D stuff. We just didn't have the technology. All the gyros were mechanical, and the power to weight ratios weren't there, and we didn't have all the fancy bits and pieces we've got today. So 3D, no. Most helicopter flying consisted of just hovering around. That's really all you did. A little bit of forward flight and so forth. Pretty much it. Now, mini rudder bug. Two channels, and this is what you'd call a miniature aircraft. And another reason I wanted to show you this magazine was to show you how much the radio gear has changed. This is obviously balsa stick and covered with film and things, so that I think probably it might have been a free plan. They used to give free plans away in these magazines. But look at the advertising, isn't that fantastic? Okay, now this is the other article I want to look at, Micro RC Equipment Survey. Now, today when we think of micro RC, we think of really 2 gram servos and sub 1 gram receivers and really small stuff. Back then, if we look down here at what we've got, I'll just pull in a bit tighter so we can read this together. Let's look at this. This is this is receivers. Receivers typically weighing 30 grams. 30 grams for a micro receiver. I think the lightest one there is about 21 grams for a micro receiver. And look at the prices. We're looking at 30, 45 pounds. And this is 35 years ago. Really expensive. So let's go over to servos. And it's just as bad. A micro servo these days, 2 grams. And most of the servos people use on foam models are 9 grams. But here, what they considered a micro servo was 25 grams, 25 grams. This is a very light one here. It's, 13.5 grams? And so these are what we'd call midi servos today. These are not micro. These are not even mini, really. These are sort of midi-sized servos. And the prices, what do you pay for a 9 gram servo these days? $3? Look at the prices. 25 quid for a micro servo, for not even a micro servo. Unbelievable. And then, of course, you've got battery packs. Let's look at our battery packs. We've got a Futaba, 250 milliamps, 57 grams. And £7.75. These days, of course, with lightweight lipos and a BEC. In fact, with electric, you don't really use a separate pack for your receiver these days, do you? And there's no talk of motors and ESCs. We've got engines. Look at this. There are the Cox engines, Cox TD. I've got one of those. You've probably seen it if you watch the channel. 28 pounds. And you even had gear drive units, so you could put tiny motors in bigger planes. Unbelievable how far we've come. And of course, there's pictures of all this stuff. Probably not easy to see. There's no real frames of reference for well, look, here's a micro model. There you go. There's the transmitter. There's the model. So you could make things pretty small, but honestly, they flew like crap because they were so heavy with all this massively heavy stuff. And imagine, look, if you go down here to the servos, typical servo, 24 grams. So if you had 4 of those, you're looking at about 100 grams. That's 4 ounces just in servos. That's, whoa. You've got another ounce for your receiver, so you're looking at 5 ounces, and you've got your battery, which weighs in here, what is that? That's 50 grams. So you're looking at a really heavy model. No wonder the micro models just didn't fly that well. And there were some pretty good articles in these magazines, like maintaining your RC equipment. It's important. You have to maintain this stuff, especially back then when it was nowhere near as good as it was today. So there's it's a bit over the top, so you can check your throws and your stuff and range testing. I mean, that's not really maintaining. That's what you do with every new model, do a range test. But some basic stuff for beginners in the hobby. And of course, this is where was this an electric one? Maybe, yeah, it was electric, but it had a Mabushi 540 brushed motor. So really old school when we had electric cars. They were not the kind of performance you expect to see today. MAP just advertising software. My goodness. New range of Spectrum. That's not the radio gear, by the way. Spectrum programs for aero modelers. So they had selling software. Amazing. Back in the 80s. Oh, I guess we had PCs back then. Did we? Yeah, we had computers anyway. Here we go, reviews, kit review. And again, this is Cotswold Kits. It's a UK company making these kits. It's not China. It didn't, although this was came as a kit, it wasn't an ARF. It looks like there's a fiberglass fuselage and some wings and stuff. You had a lot of gluing and building required. So the hobby was different. You had to be much more hands-on back then. And again, more stuff on motors, engines. This time, some vintage stuff. So, yeah, we're talking about coils and whatever. And these were good columns. I like the feedback. Well, these were columns here. Electronics. They had some circuit diagrams. They had some technical information on electronics. These were really good. Best part of the whole, because it was radio control models and electronics, although electronics was a fairly small feature. of this magazine. But then they give you circuit board layouts and things. You can build stuff. Hey, cool as. That's what I'm trying to do with RC Model Reviews is trying to make more project and electronic oriented stuff to kind of replace what the magazines were delivering us. And there we go, back to models. Again, these are all, none of these come out of China. These are not Chinese models. These are all made, in this case, in the UK or the USA. Again, lots of advertising, lots of model shops all over the place. We just don't have model shops anymore. Banggood and other companies have taken care of that. You just buy it online. Is it better? Well, certainly it's a lot cheaper. And balsa. Anybody remember balsa? Salabo balsa. That was everywhere. Everyone in the world used Salabo balsa. It was a UK company. They got their wood from Ecuador and they milled it and sanded it, and then it came exported out to the Antipodes here, where we could buy it in the local hobby shop. Can't do that anymore. I try buying a decent range of balsa these days. It's almost impossible. And UHF FM radio. UHF. This was on 433 megahertz, I think. 35 years ago. These were so damn expensive. It was about 250 quid, which you could buy, you know, a small apartment in London for that. But it was going to be the future. They thought FM UHF, that's got to be the future. But it never really took off because it was just too damn expensive for what it offered. But there are a number of companies doing it. Is this another UHF one? Narrowband FM? No, that's just a regular one. It's got a funny antenna. More model kits, helicopters. There we go. And Micron. Yes, I remember Micron radio gear. Probably not a lot else in this magazine now. We're getting towards the back where the classifieds are. But again, more models. And the models were all pretty samey because we just didn't have the technology to make cool stuff back then. There we go. Yeah, I don't see anything exciting there. Rossi engines, they were a big name in engines, very powerful, very high quality motors. Morley Helicopters, that was a UK helicopter manufacturer. They had quite a bit of success back in the day before the Chinese got involved. They made some pretty simple helicopters, and so they didn't fly that well, but for the day, they were acceptable. And then, of course, they have all these classified advertising in the back. So not a lot to see there. Nothing much there. Yeah, that's about it. That's your 35 years ago today. Oh, look, Tamiya, first of the Asian manufacturers, muscling in with the Richard. I don't know. I can't say that. Anyway, so yeah, there was a gradual appearance of stuff coming out of China and Japan, but it was only really had radio gear coming out of Japan with the Futaba and the JR stuff. Most of the other stuff was just made right there in good old Blighty in the UK by UK people, and that's it. 35 years ago. That's what women looked like 35 years ago. Sometimes I think progress is a good thing. Rightio, there you go. If you got comments, if you remember the 1980s and you flew in the 1980s, then tell us all about your experiences in the comments section on this video. If you're new to the hobby, this has probably shocked the hell out of you. My goodness, how did you survive with all this heavy old clunky radio gear and this lack of electric power is probably what you're asking yourself. But yeah, have your say too in the comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give it a thumbs up. And thank you to my Patreon supporters who make it possible for me to produce these and many other videos. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.